Leeds. What is happening? Welcome to Series 6 of Working Hours, an oral history podcast about a place called Leeds, a time called now, and an activity called work. Working Hours aims to record 200 loiners, that's people from Leeds, over the first half of the most important decade in the history of the human species, and ask them about what they do all day and hear how they feel about it. My name is Simon, and this is all my fault. My mission here is to try to map out what my city, Leeds, a city that has declared a climate emergency, did during humanity's biggest emergency. On Working Hours, we hear how loiners have, are, and will be coping with our multiple and expanding crises during their day-to-day working hours. To tell this story, I need loiners like you, dear listener. I need people in Leeds or people from Leeds to come on this podcast and tell me about what they do all day and let me record how this decade affects us. Thank you for listening to this episode. What did you want to be when you grew up?
It's a great question, and I am now 52, so I'm going to sort of sideswipe slightly by saying I'm too old to remember what I wanted to be. What I do remember is I remember being asked by older relatives what I wanted to be. I have absolutely no idea what I said to them. You know, maybe an astronaut, maybe a policeman. In fact, I was talking to my son the other day who said he wanted to be a policeman. And, you know, you have these ideas of what you want to be. But what I've realised over time is, and especially now that I'm one of those older relatives, that a more relevant question to ask a young person is, what do you not want to be? Because I think that gets you thinking about the skills that you want to use and the things that you enjoy doing without having to pigeonhole yourself into that policeman or that astronaut. So what I like to do, and I've learnt this over time, is ask myself what I don't want to do. And that helps me discover what I do want to do. And I think within that, then you can start to think about the skills that you use, what your interests are, and what's going to keep you happy through that. So I don't think I could tell you what I didn't want to do either.
I was going to ask you that.
It would have probably been some typically little boy thing, like I don't want to be a ballerina or something. Yeah. And in fact, seeing me dance now, you definitely wouldn't want me to be a ballerina either.
I didn't want to work in an office. That worked out. I've spent loads of time in offices. But then when I actually did a bit of an office role, so I came into office work sort of in a roundabout way, I kind of fell into it. But it was really nice change to sit down in a job and just, you know, fart about on a computer. Essentially, it was like, this is all right, this. I get paid more for this and I'm sitting down. So yeah, I didn't want to work in an office, and I was always like, because I wanted to do film. So I was like, I'm never going to work in an office. And people were like, you will. And I was like, I won't. And then I did. And then I was like, actually, it's not that bad. It does have lots of downsides. I don't want to go back to working in an office if I can avoid it, but it's not as bad as I thought it might be.
It can have its moments.
There's lots of good stuff about it, yeah.
Yeah, and there's camaraderie. I think just thinking a bit deeper about that, I went to a public school, and it's interesting, I was certainly bottom 10% in my year, you know, and I don't like thinking, you know, of people as bottom or top 10%, but, you know, I was, and at this school, everyone was expected, or lots of people were expected to go to Oxford and Cambridge. And I do remember his name was Mr. Jones, and I have read that he's recently passed, which is a real shame because I'd have loved to have had one more conversation with him. But I remember, and we used to call him, I can't remember his first name now, but he certainly had left-leaning views, and in a school that I suppose you were expected to join, you know, the right party, which isn't the right party. You know, he was an anomaly, and I remember him taking me under his wing, and he was involved in careers. He was an economics teacher primarily, but he took me under his wing for the career side of things. And he I remember he made it okay to think about polytechnics and think about a different path.
Yeah.
And I think you need people like that in your life who will just make it okay for you not to follow the path that is expected of you or your elders expect of you. But, you know, you can choose your own way and you take responsibility and accountability for that. And actually you will have fun doing it as well. So I think, you know, it's interesting what you say about the office, you know, I'll never, you know, you realize it's okay, but you need those role models, those people in your life to sort of almost legitimize that okay and say, look, go against the flow because, you know, that's what's going to make life interesting.
Yeah. Well, one of the questions that I thought about having in this was to talk about what your parents did. Because, I mean, that was basically what you were going to do, you know, in times past of like, well, my dad's a tailor, so I'm going to be a tailor. So it's a big thing. And for people that start their own businesses as well, it's like, who in your life was the person that said that was a thing that you could do? You know, like, who did you see that had their own business that you were like, I can do that? And I've literally had people who have started their own businesses who said, you know, I realized I could do that. Because it was like, that's not a thing for you. You know, you don't get to do that. You can't do that. You have to do this other thing. That's what you do. And it's like, well, you can do anything, really. Like, if you've got the aptitude and the interest and the opportunity, you can do it. Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's a really interesting area. But that thing of, and I don't talk about it very explicitly on the podcast very often, but the whole thing of, you know, we're of a generation where careers had already gone. Like I'm a bit younger than you, but I'm around about the same age. So I'm going to be 49 in February. But it's like, I already knew there were no careers when I went into the workforce. But also I've interviewed people who have had careers still, you know, they managed to stay somewhere for 20 years or whatever. They've been doing the same thing. They've developed the skills in that and so on. Whereas my work has been, I've done a year here and a year there and a year, 6 months there, 3 weeks there. And, which I think is good. You know, it's good to have all those opportunities and different experiences and so on, but you're not really getting, I mean, I've developed skills. I've got various office skills and transferable skills and all this kind of stuff, but I haven't got a craft, you know, like I haven't got a career. I haven't got, like, I'm not a thing unless a bureaucrat or an administrator is a thing, which it's not really what I want to be. But we're working in a weird area and time where we've got all this choice, but also you don't, because you know it's out there, but you don't know it's in here, if that makes sense. Of like, well, you can just go and do that and you ask around and you find out about it and off you go. But you're like, but how do I do that? So you go outside and you go and ask questions, all this kind of stuff. So I think it's a really weird thing of, you know, I think it's very difficult for us to find what we want to do now in a way that that wasn't really a problem before. You just kind of did something and that was to get money, and then you had your life outside of it. Even though you spent your entire life in work, there's still this idea that you had a life outside of work. It's just weird.
There's certainly, it felt like there was, or it feels like there was more conformity in the past to paths. I sit slightly in the middle from what you've just described of not having a career, because I think I did jump around a lot. But, you know, for the last 12 years, I have done not the same role, but I have been within the same organisation. So I suppose, you know, half my working life is within a career and the other half was jumping around. I have had fun doing both. Yeah. And I think that's the most important thing I've learned within this, is like, you've really got to enjoy what you do. I'm not 100% certain I've always enjoyed work. And I think I've always said this, I would happily give up tomorrow if I could. I don't have an extravagant life, but if I could be comfortable and do the things that pursue my interests outside of work and not have to worry, then I wouldn't be working. Yeah. I would miss the interaction with people, but I would find that somewhere else. So I think the most important thing is we've got to recognise that our lives are short, and we need to make sure we have fun during that and smile, and connection is part of that. So I think, as long as a job creates connection or a career creates connection, it's going to provide satisfaction. I don't think that's quite the right word, but I struggle to think.
No, but I like that. I think that's quite nicely expressed. And like you said, one of the things that came up or has come up consistently, and we were talking earlier, like networking and that whole, and how people fall into work backwards, especially in the kind of social and voluntary sector and charity sector, of like the amount of people who are just trying to help out, doing various things, and then it becomes something that they can either get funded or they get a job in, and then it's like, and now I've been doing this development work for the past 6 years, and I've done all these things, and I just started a thing, and then now I've got this job. So, and equally that works in the private sector as well, of like, I started doing this, and then I made these connections. Or I started with this business, then I met this chap and this woman over here, and then I gave that up and I started doing this other thing, and then that's become a huge thing. And it's all the interactions. It's those connections that spark things happening, but not all the time. It's like particles, isn't it? Running around until they bang into each other and something happens. Yeah. So, any more to say on this before we move us to the next question?
I think, it's been enjoyable, but I've probably run out of steam.
You're listening to Series 6, Episode 34, and to my guest, Dominic Charkin. This is another in-person recorded at the Old Red Fire Station in Gipton, which is great. If you've not been down there, go have a look. Recorded on the 5th of November, 2025. Hello, colleague. I'm glad that I have been able to capture another ending on working hours, as 3 episodes of this show start to come to an end, which could, of course, also mean this show coming to an end too. If you'd like to be on working hours for free, there's still a half dozen places left that you can grab while they are there. There will be more details about being a guest on this show at the end of this episode. Dominic Charkin was the CEO of Zest, a charity that was established in 2002 to work with local people to identify and overcome issues that affect their health and well-being at a community level. In the few months before our interview, the trustees had decided that now was the time to close Zest's doors, and Dominic was in the middle of working through that decision when this interview took place. Dom discusses winding down the charity after 2 decades of impactful service. He reflects on lessons learned and shares insights on the importance of asking, what don't you want to be, instead of what do you want to be? We delve into the nuances of charity work, the challenges of short-term funding, the importance of connection within communities, and broader societal issues. As Dom prepares to transition from this role, he emphasised the lasting impact of Zest and the importance of trying, celebrating, and making meaningful connections. This episode offers a deep dive into the dynamic life of charity work and the importance of embracing change and uncertainty in meaningful ways. While there is sadness for Dom in the decision to close, he says that he's learned so much about endings and how to make them positive, as well as having a newfound voice, one that, being at the behest of commissioners and funders, doesn't always allow. Right, let's do this. Episode 189 of Working Hours with Dominic Charkin. So, to contrast what you wanted to be, I then ask, what do you do now?
Well, I'm now the chief executive of a charity called Zest. We're a company limited by guarantee, and I guess that's important to know because charities need to make money to survive like in any other business. So we're a company limited by guarantee, but we're also a charity registered with the Charities Commission, and that means that we have to make sure that anything we do make is reinvested to achieve our vision and our mission. We've been running since 2002. We were originally set up under the previous Labour government with funding called Healthy Living Funding under the New Opportunities Fund, working in certain areas of Leeds with local people to come up with local solutions to the health and wellbeing charities, the health and wellbeing challenges that they were facing. I think sort of way back in 2002, and I wasn't working with them then, those were sort of health and wellbeing inequalities was an area that wasn't really well understood. And I think there was 5 areas that, it's sort of smoke less, move more, eat more
5
vegetables,
a day,
all of that. The messaging was really simple, and we were just trying to work with people to come up with solutions. It might be that there wasn't availability of that produce locally, so I have to get 6 buses, so it's like, how do we overcome those problems? But it was the local people coming up with ideas for that. Over time, our mission and our vision and what we're set up to do has stayed the same. However, the thinking has got slightly more refined. And I was talking about connection before. I think, the single biggest challenge that we wish to overcome is actually creating connection between people. So, and from connection comes happiness, from happiness comes well-being. And, so what we do now and what we say now that we do is we use food to create choice, celebration and connection. So we're not here to provide, to redistribute surplus food, because there's some great charities doing that. We're not here to sort of tell people, eat this, don't eat this, otherwise the world will implode. But what we want to do is use a metaphorical table to bring people together to learn about the choices that they might have. You can eat that, but actually this is going to save yourself. It's going to help the planet. It's growing down the road, and that strawberry tastes so much better having moved 5 meters rather than 500 miles. So it's choice. But in sitting down with people and eating together, you also create connection. And we've run some wonderful stuff, with asylum seekers and newly granted refugees, just sharing the recipes from home and talking about them and just invoking, happiness that food brings. And it also tastes great, and we all like that. But celebration as well. I think we forget that. We're as charities, we're so often seen as solving a problem that we forget to celebrate the good stuff that happens. And so we need to just sort of peek over that fence and say, there's challenge, there's shit happening the whole time. However, we've got to celebrate the good stuff as well. So we sort of focus on choice, celebration and connection. That said, the focus of my work at the moment is currently closing the charity. Times are really tough, and I'm not saying that to look for an excuse. The last, what shall I say, the last 14 years have been extremely challenging for every community in Leeds, but the communities that we are primarily working with, they've been even harder for lots and lots of reasons, and the inequality that exists in the city has got greater, not shrunk. Certainly over the last 14 years, but probably
more especially over the last 5.
But it's endemic. It's a long term. We are talking about long term decline, really. And within all of that, So the need for our service is rising, but the resource available to all the services working in the same area has reduced. And, in July of this year, the trustees of the charity took the brave decision to say enough is enough. We could see when cash was going to run out, and we had time, but rather than doing something in a chaotic way, we said, okay, let's just stop. And pause, reflect, and say, this isn't working for us now. And rather than leaving, the world of reducing inequality in a chaotic way that would be good for no one, no one for the staff, for the trustees, for the city. Let's wind down and work out how we can end positively. And as I'm working through that process, I've worked out that for every ending, there has to be a new beginning as well. Yeah. And so, we are trying to end positively so that we can leave an impression for the city and leave a message of hope for the city, I suppose, as well.
Okay, we'll come back to that. I'm going to go into my next question. So how did you get into this?
How long have you got?
We've got 2 hours.
Yeah.
An hour.
I'll leave off from where I ended talking a little while ago about my economics teacher, Mr. Jones. And as a result of some of his intervention, but also probably a bit of stubbornness on my behalf, and probably wanting to stick 2 fingers up at, parents and people like that expected me to go into something different. I ended up studying construction management at, UMIST, so in Manchester. And I had a great time. I'm lucky enough to have studied when we didn't have fees to pay. And so, I probably spent far too much time in the pub and not enough time in lecture halls. But I came out of
That's the school of life.
Yeah. I'm unashamed of that. I had a great time. I came out of there with a good degree. I got a 2-1, but I also realised that I definitely did not want to get into construction management. It's a theme there. It's like, I've realised I don't want to do that. I think the reason was that there's far too much conflict. We had modules on conflict resolution because when something overruns, it's not because the weather, it's because you haven't done it. And so therefore we're going to sue. And you just think, what's that all about? I don't want to get into the world where I'm instantly going to have to blame someone else for everything that's not gone right. That doesn't seem right. But within that, I did some other really great modules, things like people and organisations, where you're learning what makes people tick, what makes organisations tick, and organisations are organisms as well. So they can be living things. And I realised I had a deep interest in connection and people and seeing things thrive. And that's probably been the driver for me. So, it took me, I probably left university at 23, 24. So it took me 24 years to work out what I wanted to do or what I enjoyed doing. From there, I came over to Leeds, where I did a master's in the built environment, and I looked at environmental management systems within the construction industry because, actually by building something, you are changing your environment. Can the construction industry do things that are good for the environment and still change the environment? So I looked at that. And from there, because I still didn't really want to do anything, I wanted to do something meaningful, but I didn't want to think about what that might be. I ended up in Guatemala.
Oh, nice.
I set off over there, again, probably to stick 2 fingers up at people and say, I'm going to bloody make this work. I ended up in Guatemala to do some volunteering. And I was lucky enough to realise, okay, well, I'm here. I've decided to come here to stick 2 fingers up at people. If I go home with my tail between my legs now, I'm going to look pretty stupid, and then I'm going to have to go and work in that office that they want me to. So I ended up banging on doors in a reasonably big city in Guatemala called Chimaltenango. And let me assure you, at the time, there was no reason to go there. If you were a tourist, which I suppose I was, there was no reason to go. It was a sort of a crossroads between, one...
Is it a dirt road town?
Yeah, properly. But I banged on the door of a reforestation organisation, and I was lucky enough that they took a risk and said, we've got something that we think you could help out with, so come and volunteer with us. And I had 9 great months there, and I helped set up. They worked in indigenous communities, setting up tree nurseries, predominantly with the women in those communities, because the men were either working the fields or were drinking the fertiliser. It's pretty brutal. Yeah. And the women, whilst they had some control over the household income, they were still seen as sort of second-class citizens in lots of ways. So it was supporting women to have, to develop local industry and local enterprise that they could generate their own income and do some good.
Were they collective or individual?
Collective, yeah.
So that goes back to the connection thing as well, because so often you're presented with these things, again, of that atomization of like, you know, we're teaching this, we're not giving him a fishing net, we're teaching him how to fish. And it's like, but if you're teaching 5 of them how to fish at the same time, you know, and then they've got that connection, and then they can learn from each other as well. And they're not just learning from your instructions and then they're coming up with their own solutions, and that sort of community again. Yeah.
And if you do this collectively, you've got support around you to make it succeed, but also you've got accountability to others as well.
Yeah.
So I helped set the problem they had is they communities and the populations started these, but there was no exit for them, you know, and so we were offering support for too long. So we put in place a system to reduce the level of input from the staff working in the organisation, to allow them to thrive on their own and take those nurseries in the way that they wanted to in the end, you know, make the choices that they wanted to. So I said I had a great time there. One of the things I realised there was Guatemala was not long out of a civil war, and the people that came off worst in that civil war were the local indigenous communities. You know, the men no longer wore the outfits, the
traditional
dress, because if they had during that civil war, they would have been killed.
Yeah.
Someone I worked with, he was the American sort of founder of this charity, said, you know, we used to find bodies outside the military base on a regular basis. And, you know, it helped me form an understanding of the challenges we face globally and, you know, sort of, I suppose, more recently locally, about what inequality does, you know, and actually, you know, if we don't solve that, you know, we don't solve anything. So I became passionately involved with sort of trying to support the reduction of inequality, you know, and actually everyone should have the same opportunities, and it shouldn't be for the people in power to decide, you know, in the most extreme, who has the right to live and die, but you know, how we eradicate, you know, not being able to feed ourselves and all of that sort of stuff. So inequality became really important. So again, that experience, you know, I had a great time, but I got grounding. I understood some of the challenges that I suppose I'd been shielded from through my upbringing.
Yeah.
But, you know, I certainly didn't have an answer. I had a drive, and I think that's helped shape my career. You know, that drive has helped shape my career. Yeah, all good things come to an end, and I had to come home. And after that, I've done various jobs from, I've been a learning mentor in a school in South Leeds, working with children who were disaffected. There's a term we don't hear anymore, but, you know, disengaged from
the disaffected youth.
Yes, from education. And, you know, I talked about the bottom 10% in my school. You know, my eye was open to what sort of, you know, the bottom 10% in you know, state education looks like. And, you know, that was quite, it was you know,
shocking.
Yeah, shocking, genuinely shocking. You know, here I am being considered bottom 10%, and, you know, actually look at that inequality. It's massive.
Like, I know, like, I've been into places in Seacroft and other places in Leeds where you're like, people have no idea of, like, how people are living here and how things have been normalised for them. Like, not across the board, but there are extremes of things, aren't there, where you experience something and you're like, my God, that's shocking.
Yeah.
Like, that's all just normal for them. And that's like, I don't even know where to start to unpack that. But yeah, it is, because we're kind of like, we're a first world country, and we're this, that, and the other, and there's poverty, and it's awful, isn't it? You know, a few people can't do this, and then you see it up close, and you're like, yeah, it is awful, yeah.
There's a brilliant book written by, he'll be really pleased I'm giving him a plug, by a guy called Stu Hennigan. He works for
Ghost Stories,
Ghost Signs,
Ghost Signs. I still need to read that. I've not read it yet.
It's amazing. I mean, I was lucky enough to know Stu through our work, you know, briefly know him through our work pre-COVID.
Yeah.
And, you know, I emailed him having read the book and said, you know, that was great. And every so often we now meet for a coffee, but it really makes you aware of the challenges the city face and, you know, the normalisation of poverty in lots of ways. So yeah, I dotted around, but it was, again, my career, you know, was all about trying to not solve problems, because I don't believe I should be solving problems, but actually helping people, equipping people with the tools to solve problems themselves. So again, I talk a lot about responsibility and accountability, but it's like, you know, actually take the responsibility, you know, because what you were saying earlier, you can do it. You know, it's actually building people up to say, you can do this. Yeah, and that wasn't just in Leeds. In fact, I didn't really work in Leeds. I was up in Kendal. I was in Kirklees. I also worked for VSO for a while doing community development with young people. That took me from Wrexham to a town called Hamaria in South Africa, to Keighley. There's lots of K's in there, aren't there? Keighley to somewhere in northeast Thailand as well. You know, so I had some great times, you know, working and seeing, learning how other people and other cultures, and you know, and that's locally, nationally, and globally, solve problems. You know, because we're too quick to say, well, that's wrong, this is right. Yeah. Actually, you can learn something from everyone, and I always remember.
Well, yeah, it's like, why are they? They are people who have thought this through and they've come up with something for reasons. So what are the reasons? And like, what is it doing? Why does it work? Why have they kept it? You know, people aren't stupid. They're not just going, oh, we're going to do this stupid thing for no reason because some stupid person told us to do it. But now you're here and you're all wise, you can tell us what to do properly.
And I because on VSO, the youth exchange was 9 British volunteers and 9 Thai or South African volunteers came together, and they lived and worked in pairs. Yeah. None of them were from the communities we ended up in. So, it takes away a safety net. But I spent quite a lot of my time, and I worked with a counterpart from the other, the other country, sort of challenging the British view that we're right. And that was really, once they got it, it's like, okay. And I always used to use the example, certainly in Thailand, very often houses are on stilts now. I think at some point soon we're going to need stilts on our houses. Yeah. But, there's a reason for that. Floods. Yeah. And actually, because of the heat as well, it's a hotter country, you don't spend time indoors, but you need shade. Yeah. So what a perfect place to have your sofa or whatever. And you suddenly realize there's a reason for this. It's not because they're backward or anything, or, that they're just silly. It's like this has come about because of hundreds of thousands of years of learning how to do something that suits those people to make, life as comfortable as it possibly can. And so you realise that everything is done for a reason, and we just do things differently, but we can learn from other people.
I think some of that this is a real tangent that I probably shouldn't open, but I think some of that comes from the sort of historical narrative of great men, of like, oh, well, society only moves forward or does a thing when some great person comes forward. But it's like, that great person's just taken a bunch of other ideas that are already around and in existence. It's like how knowledge is created, isn't it? It's like, you've got this idea that's new and this idea that's new, and you've learnt them both, but then you can connect them in a way that other people haven't yet, or, and that's something new. That's how something new comes about. It's just like, someone's going to get there eventually, like, TV was going to be invented no matter what. It doesn't matter who did it first. Same with film and photography. Like, all of these things were already percolating. It was just a matter of time before someone kind of brought them together and made it into that new thing. And there was a few people doing it at the time. And I think it's that whole sort of, as I say, big tangent.
I mean, no, but it's an interesting one, because my son, he's 6. He's currently learning about explorers. And, you might be able to tell, like, new things. So, I'm interested in exploration. Mm-hmm. And one of my all-time hero is Shackleton, but we won't go there. It's just his leadership is just incredible. But I'm trying to teach my son or give him knowledge of an explorer called Wilfred Thesiger. Not many people know about him. Nope. He's written some fascinating books. He's no longer alive. And one of them I forget what it's called, but he travels through the empty quarter of the Arabian desert at a time where, if an infidel was in the empty quarter, they wanted blood. And the way he was able to do that, he got some letters from chieftains and the right people, but he still, that wasn't safe passage.
Yeah.
He had to assimilate, and so he had to live as those people. And his learning, and I love that word, assimilate. He had to learn from them, because he couldn't go in and say, you're wrong. It wouldn't keep him alive. So, but his learning was all about just going and living with people and being with them and understanding how they tick. And that's how knowledge, how you assimilate knowledge, which you can then share, and we as a society, a global society, can learn from. So, you're right. It's knowledge has to come from somewhere, but it's not a great man who does that. It's just we should
have all of us.
Our eyes open to ideas the whole time, because we're never too old to learn.
Yeah. So we've got to. So you're back in the UK. You're doing VSO.
Yeah. Well. I'll cut what's been a very long story short. I worked out that I wanted to work in my own city. So you may be able to tell I'm not a native Yorkshireman, but I have chosen Leeds to be my home. It's where I'm bringing my child up, and he reminds me on a regular basis that I'm not a Yorkshireman, but yet he is, which also makes me proud. I think he should be proud of where he's from and his roots. So I wanted to move to Leeds, or I was in Leeds. I wanted to work in the city, and I wanted to bring some of my knowledge to the drive that I had. So I was lucky enough to end up working for Zest, and through. Well, you don't.
Did you come in? Were they advertising for your position? You came in, or
no? They were. I started my journey with Zest as a volunteer coordinator for what was known as the Yorkshire Community Cooperative. So a cooperative of 3 organisations, and I was trying to find volunteers that would sit in any one of those 3 organisations. As with any charitable work, the funding came to an end, and I must have proven my worth. You don't have a career in a charity, because when the money runs out, you might be out on your ear. And I knew I had 2 years, but I was lucky enough to have impressed some people enough that they found some money from their core to support my development within the organisation. Obviously, I had to bring in additional funding, and over time I became the community's projects manager, because I am at heart a community development worker.
Yeah, and also you've got that management training and experience. You've got the project planning, like that's your training, and then you've got the practical experience in the field as well. So it's kind of a natural fit.
And I suppose I like seeing people develop. So over time, from communities projects manager, I became the operations manager of the organisation, and making sure that we had enough to survive and carry on, and then became deputy CEO. And just over 4 years ago, when my old boss stepped down, I was lucky enough to through competitive interview, be asked to take on the role. So that's where I am now. And just going back to the sort of the closing, I suppose I never wanted to be a leader who closed an organisation, because there's sort of.
It feels like failure.
But it's not failure. Actually accepting that everything has a life is okay, and it's how you make that positive. So I've learnt my most important lesson recently is closing and finishing something isn't failure. It's actually accepting.
It's going to happen. It's an essential part of the process, isn't it? And I think that's one of the things that we don't think about. So I did this interview ages ago with someone. Do you know Pure House, Passive House? Yeah. So it was the guy from Pure House who build passive houses, and he was talking about the entire life cycle thing of you have to plan in the ending as well. And it's like we don't do that enough. It's interview recently we were moaning about VAT and the sort of like, you know, because VAT was brought in as a temporary tax. When's it going then? Oh, we're going to bump it up from 17 to 20%, just on a temporary basis. How temporary is this temporary? When does it end? But yeah, life cycles should be considered. It's that whole sort of thing of like, we'll build this thing, and then that's a problem for someone in 60, 100 years or whatever. And it's like, but it's full of asbestos, and also it's like, what have you done to us? Think things through.
I've recently read a quote, and I'll try and remember it in its entirety, because when I've been thinking about closing something, and it's Icarus wasn't failing when he was falling, he was just coming to the end of his triumph. and I don't know, sorry if it was you who came up with that, you know. I like it. But it's, you know, we have to just start to accept that you know, actually things finish, and that's good. You know, actually we're all going to finish at some point.
And what happens after happily ever after? Yeah, no, it's a really good point. Let's jump into COVID.
Yeah.
So where were you at this point in the journey? Were you sort of out in the field still, rather than doing the planning work and the strategy?
I was pen pushing and shoving paper clips across desks and things like that by that stage. Yeah, I wasn't in the field when COVID struck. You know, I don't ever consider myself not in the field. You know, again, my old boss Susie, she used to say that Wellington said, time spent in reconnaissance is never time wasted. So actually being out there, you know, whatever stage you are in your career, and, you know, however you are as a person, you know, get out and speak to people, because that's the most important thing. So, and that's one way I would like to be remembered as a leader, you know, just understanding from other people. But when COVID hit, we did have to close as an organisation. We had to close our doors as an organisation, but we didn't stop working. And what we did, though, is we had to stop seeing people in the same way as an organisation as we did before. And, you know, I will say from the very outset, our funders and our commissioners were really supportive in that. So they were really flexible. So they knew that we couldn't just stop our services, but they trusted us as an organisation to work out how best to support people at a distance, and, you know, extremely quickly. And they also, more so then than now maybe, were happy for us to make mistakes, you know, and learn from those mistakes quickly. So I was involved in supporting our staff to adjust to that change, and how we supported them, you know, supported the communities that we were, you know, 2 days before meeting with face to face. How do we support you? So that started by supporting staff through making phone calls to people. You know, none of us knew how to use Zoom. I mean, you know, who uses Zoom anyhow?
Nobody had heard of Zoom.
Yeah, and who uses it now? You know, we're all teams. But you know, so it's learning how to use these things. So it was, you know, my role was really supporting the organisation to move dynamically and rapidly, and supporting the staff to support people out there to listen to the voices, so that the response itself, I was about to say the city, but I think it's the response could change accordingly. And we got masses wrong, but we also got a lot right. And, you know, I think that's, you know, my role was to help that process happen, I suppose.
So there's a few bits that I want to dig into on this. So normally I ask people, what was the experience going into lockdown? Because it falls into three broad categories of, I didn't get a moment because I was just fielding phone calls, ringing suppliers and, you know, all your stakeholders, or it fell off the cliff and I had no business and didn't know what I was going to do, or it continued on, which again was just, I'm working more than ever because I'm doing the same thing. Well, for some people it's like, if you're doing construction or something, you're outside and the weather's quite nice and the roads are clear, it's kind of like, it was golden. But if you're working in healthcare and it's like, you're being run ragged and you feel really responsible, your work has changed significantly, but you're still doing the same role, sort of thing. But what was the experience going in, and then what do you feel kind of changed permanently for you and possibly the organisation coming out the other side, wherever that's placed for you?
I think, you know, I think and I've thought about this. So, I'll describe me and the organisation, because I think there's two different things there. For the organisation going into COVID, it felt very insecure. We didn't have any guarantees that we would be supported by our funders and our commissioners to change in this way. And so, personally, there was masses going on. It's like, okay, I need to phone this person, I need to speak to that person.
Well, you wouldn't have had any idea what was going to happen. So, and everyone's coming to you as the person to answer questions.
Yeah.
So that's not a good experience.
But you realise that you support one another. So we had a really strong team. Some of our staff did go on furlough. So how do we do that? Talking to your trustees, ringing your staff. Finding out who within the people that we have been working with, are in need. So it was I don't juggle, but it's suddenly you're juggling 15 different things. And you had to adjust to being at home as well, which I genuinely loved, because I didn't have to travel. I was able to get out. I like running, so I was able to get out running most days at a time that suited me, which is generally very early in the morning, but that's glorious. So I could help organise my thoughts. But I've said I've got a 6-year-old now. He was less than 1 when COVID hit. And I consider myself really lucky that I had the time at home with him that otherwise I wouldn't have had. So I saw my son develop that a lot of working fathers wouldn't necessarily get to see. And also on top of that, we took the stress. So my partner and I took the stress of COVID. He didn't have any of that, so he's hit the sweet spot. Every single. So I look at it sort of organisationally. It was chaotic, but challenging, but fun because it was different. For me, it was adjustment and I guess I'm talking with hindsight here, but there was great pleasure with that as well. And I know that again, that's also from a place of privilege, because not everyone had that. So I suppose again, the hindsight is I was lucky, but there are lots of people out there who weren't and are still unlucky in that they don't have that luxury that I have. And again, that's wrong, So what can we do about that? And then what changed again for the organisation? I think I've talked about the flexibility that the funders gave us. I do think that that's a double-edged sword, because I think we ended up working a lot closer with our commissioners, and we ended up becoming closer with them. And I don't think this is explicit, but I think that sort of meant we have less opportunity to challenge when we're asked to do something. So I'm giving you some money, I now expect this. And certainly the landscape over the last few years, and it's not just coming out of COVID, it's sort of moving into cost of living. There's been lots of short-term funding. Can you do this? Yes, because we need the money to keep ourselves going. But actually, we need to plan for the long term. And we know that comes to an end in 6 months, 12 months, 15 months. And so we need to be planning now for how we replace that. Whereas before it wasn't ideal. It should be minimum 5 years, it's usually 3. So I think the short-term funding creates and has created a real false sense of security.
And that short-term thinking, the lack of longer-term planning.
And so I think, and we probably have less opportunity to be a challenging voice because we're more reliant on that money.
You're more familiar as well, and you know the people more, so you don't want to upset the boat, and it's that sort of. So it's the conflict of interest thing without being a conflict of interest. I think that's a really really interesting point.
And then sort of personally, and I think this goes across the sector, so the charitable, the voluntary sector, whatever you want to call it. And in fact, a lot of the caring professions, I don't think we've given ourselves the opportunity to stop and pause and reflect. And I think, as I come to
and even process what happened.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's not just COVID, that's cost of living and,
Brexit.
Whatever you want to blame it on. It's like, actually, because we're running faster to stay in the same place.
Yeah.
I think we're not looking after ourselves. And so as I move towards the end of my time at Zest, I'm saying I'm going to have some time to myself, because what I think I've learned that probably started in COVID is we've not had reflection time. We've not had time to I recently attended the Decelerator Assembly, and the Decelerator is set up to support charities going through endings, and that might be the end of a project, that might be the changing of the guard at the top, or it might be closure, it could be anything. And I went to the assembly where we spent some time thinking about this and talking about it and thinking about good endings, whatever they might be. And I had a conversation with someone about reflection, and I said how much I love it, because you see something, it goes in at the top of your head, and it takes a little while to percolate down, and that's where it shapes you and it shapes your thoughts and your ideas. But we never get that time because we're suddenly on to the next thing, and that might be because we live in a world where we want short-term gain the whole time anyhow. But actually, none of us give ourselves the time to really percolate and think. We go back to Wellington and his ideas about reconnaissances. It's the staring out the window moment that you don't think you've got enough time to do. But
I'm so on board.
Yeah.
I was one of those kids. He's always daydreaming and stuff. It's like that's good. People should be doing that. And also with rest. One of the things that we did learn in COVID, I mean, your sector is different because you have to be on high alert, you're in crisis mode. But there would have been, like you say, there were silver linings to that, the working from home, more casual space, having a bit more time for family stuff and so on. But at the same time, the work is like, we've got even more to do. But yeah, rest is just so underestimated. And, I talk about a lot of so you have a machine with a gauge on it, and you've got the yellow bit, then you've got the green bit where it's running good, and then you've got the red bit where it's running too fast and it's going to burn out. And we want to run everything in the red 24/7. And it's like, even with a machine, you can't do that. They burn out, they break, you reduce the life of your machine by running it in the red all the time. And we expect ourselves to do that when we're biological beings. We sleep every night, we shut down. That is built into us. We die. We're supposed to, we work on a basis naturally of slow, fast, and there is rest in between. And that's such a vital part of work.
Yes. But
it's like we put all these, it's the column thing, isn't it? We've moved rest into this column of unproductive, and it's like, well, what is the productive, and what kind of production are we engaged in, and what is the important production? And the David Graeber thing of you make a cup once, you wash it 100,000 times. Most work is maintenance, it's not production. And I think about all those things, and we're in this. Do things, like you said earlier, just do, go. Don't stop and think about it, just keep going. Even if you're stuck in traffic and you can't go anywhere, be in go mode.
Yeah. Nothing more needs to be said. It is actually just, we need to be kinder to ourselves. And we can't be super people to everyone the whole time, actually, the most important person you have to answer to is yourself. Mm-hmm. But going back to COVID, I suppose the last thing I want to say is, if you're asking me how's it affected my work, let's not forget that the gap between the richest and the poorest in society has got wider, and COVID has played a part in that.
It was it's the most latest one, but it was an even bigger transfer of wealth than 2008. Yeah, and also a massive, probably one of the biggest periods of fraud in.
I was going to say, let's talk about Oh, yeah.
One of the other things, so two other things on COVID before I move on. So one of them is like, how much do you think it played into, like, do you think it permanently damaged you in a way that it's kind of like had an impact on this or led to this in terms of winding up? And what was the other thing that I wanted to ask you? I'll let you answer that and then I might remember the other one.
I don't think it's had a huge impact on winding up. I think, the questions we talk about are all interlinked. So I think there is all a narrative that comes back to, yes, this is all an impact that collectively, it builds to that. But I don't think it directly did.
Yeah.
We at the time had set up a social enterprise with the aim of that developing an income that supported the core function of the charity, and it was less than a year old and it was doing well. And I think that, obviously through COVID, we had some really squeaky bum moments where, it's like, does this survive? Does it not? It did. However, COVID probably meant that it was far harder to get onto an even keel, and we have had to close that in a more chaotic fashion recently as a result of that. So I think it overall, it wasn't the final nail in the coffin, but certainly it had an impact. And I will go back to the short-term funding. That it positively impacts your bottom line, but it creates a false sense of security. And actually, it creates more work, but there's less people to do that work. So it's created additional challenges that have meant work has been harder.
Yeah. And the other question, I did remember it, was, so it kind of is a bit linked to, the sort of you becoming more suited, more stitched in with your funders and other stakeholders and so on. But one of the things that seems to have come out from my interviews with people is that a lot of the voluntary sector and charity sector in Leeds, like the mass of mutual aid and co-working and joining up, and like the council being really good in terms of helping where they could with various charities of like, I've known of charities of like, we need X amount of money for this, and the council's just like, great, here, have that, and you do that. And like, who else is doing stuff? We've got a bit of money, we can give that to you. And it was just sort of like, things were happening and people could organise quite quickly, and there was a lot of co-working and joining up and kind of. Did you have that experience as well? Was that the feeling for you guys?
Yes. We are lucky enough to operate within a partnership, the Orion Consortium. So we had good relationship with other third sector organisations, and because of our links with the statutory sector, we came together and were closer. But I think that goes beyond an already existing good relationship, and I think. When I worked over in Kirklees, I worked for the council, and one reason I decided I didn't want to work for the council particularly anymore is because of the machine. It takes so long to get stuff done. And that's not being rude. I understand.
No, it just has. It's like it has to go through the motions.
Bureaucracy, and that's fine because this is public money, and we need to know that it's being spent. Well,
or at least that we can see where it's being spent.
And actually we should accept that it won't always go right. But it's like, rather than seeing that as a failure, that's something we can learn from. But I think the third sector, so the voluntary sector, is far more flexible, and I think that's a willingness to try. And I think that when those two worlds met, it created good stuff because of that. I do think the flip is that we're probably slightly misunderstood now. There's always this talk about the within the prevention agenda, we're seen as a partner at the top table. Within the city, I'm not quite sure that we are actually.
It's kind of like you're being gentrified.
Yeah,
in a way.
In some ways, we're the cement in between the bricks, but we don't get the credit for being the thing that holds it together, and we're and I don't think everyone quite understands how the sector works and how it's funded, and which is why I was quite clear at the beginning that we have to make money. We're not doing this for free. And you would be surprised how many times people say, so you get paid for your job? Yes.
Yes.
How else do I eat? And people who should know better sort of do, so I think that there's still a misunderstanding of what we can do, and actually, but I think there's too many people willing to just I've learned one of the most powerful things you can do is, if you're being offered a particularly short-term funding, say no sometimes. Just say no. Say no, because
I can't do
this
anything.
Doesn't work. And I think we're not quite there yet. We need to, as a sector, have a voice that says, no to some of these ridiculous ideas.
Well, and also that and the private sector would, unless you're in really desperate situations and you're trying to make it work. But if you are sort of like, you can be more realistic about the budget of, I can't do anything with that. Well, you expect me to deliver all of these things with this much money? No. But like you say, with the charity sector, it's like, yeah, but you did all that marvellous stuff with nothing. And it's like, yeah, I did it with nothing, and now I have chronic illness.
I used to have hair before.
Maybe if you gave me enough money, I could do something like that, and also thrive myself, and help these other people thrive, and make it more sustainable, rather than 6 months of something good happening and 3 or 4 positive outcomes that I can report. These can be loads of positive outcomes that happen continually, because we've built something that lasts, that people can reproduce, and it isn't just there for a bit and then goes away when the money goes away. So on that note, let's do Brexit. So I expect this it's either going to be a yes or a no in terms of, has it affected things for you? So has it?
So this is a minefield, isn't it? Yes, it has. I think it's quite refreshing to hear some honesty, or the green shoots of honesty about Brexit appearing now. And that gives you an indication of what I believed way back in 2016 as well, which I'm unashamed of. I know that the decision was made, and we have to live with that decision, and I respect that as well. But I think the honesty around the economic impact of Brexit needs to be brought to the forefront, and it's really refreshing to see that happening, in recent days, and we are talking that long it's taken to be at this point. In terms of the work, I think the economic trickle down from that, year by year loss of probably GDP, but income, basically national income, is being felt now. So the trickle down into the communities that we work is being felt. So I think, the big picture stuff is, yes, Brexit has affected our work because it's led to a scarcity of financial resource that means that the prevention agenda that we all want to work to is just not being allowed to thrive. So I think that's a national challenge that we all face. And I think it also means that there has been short-term investment rather than long-term investment because of that paucity of resource. And I also think that we've avoided the adult discussions we need to have about the success or otherwise of Brexit. So I think, the politicians have been hiding from having those difficult discussions, and that affects the work we do, because unless we can talk about the elephant in the room, we can't do anything about it. So on a macro scale, yes, it has. However, economics doesn't sort of describe it all. I'm proud that Leeds narrowly voted to remain. I'm really proud of my city, However, it was very close. It was sort of 50-50, 51-49. I don't remember what it was, which means there are 49% of people who didn't get in Leeds the result that they wanted. And I think that, and I do believe that in part Brexit was a protest vote. And it was a protest that hasn't led to meaningful change for the communities that wanted to shout and wanted to protest. And so I think that those challenges that they were protesting about remain, and in fact have because of the lack of resource, have become amplified. And actually I think that has had an impact on division, mistrust, fear, and hatred. And so, in terms of cohesion amongst the communities we work, I think it's got looser rather than stronger. And I think that is a significant, that's the most significant impact I think Brexit has had on our work. It's actually, the communities that we want to create connection for are actually being driven apart by the protest and the lack of resource to try and overcome some of these challenges and have adult conversations about them. Hopefully I've answered that.
No, you have, and it was a good diplomatic answer. I will say this, we can always cut it out. But so when I was at Union Learn, so we're talking back end of the 2000s into the 2010s, I remember all the discussions then when Blair was still in power about, rising poverty, the BBC putting BNP on, all of these kind of things. They were already there. Do you know what I mean? And all that's happened is that they've festered and festered and festered. That was before austerity. That was before 2008. Places were dying already. Like literally now, you must know about these towns and stuff we're insulated from it in Leeds. Like the council's not in good financial shape, but we're one of the richest cities in the country. And by and large, we're not feeling things as badly as a lot of the rest of the country, but we still are. But all of those things that were already there, like towns that were dying and all this kind of stuff, and it's just got worse and worse and worse. And again, it's this thing of like, nobody's addressing it and they're not even talking about it. It's like the room's filling up with elephants. We've got to start talking about all these elephants before we get squashed. So I'll just add that you can respond if you want to, but don't feel you have to.
No, I agree. And again, what I sort of alluded to with these things are all interlinked. Like COVID is interlinked to Brexit, and the clearly it's not in itself, but actually the challenges that they throw up are all interlinked, and unless we see it all as one big. One big elephant, if you like. We've got to address them all. And finally, I think on Brexit is, again, I'll say that the gap between the haves and the have-nots, the richest and the poorest, is getting wider. And I do believe that Brexit has played a role in that as well.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm going to move us on to another tiny topic, climate change. I don't need to really preface this. I'm just going to throw it open to you. So how does climate change play into your work?
It probably doesn't in lots and lots of ways. However, climate change is the single biggest challenge that that our species faces, and that is globally, nationally and locally. And
long term.
Yeah.
We're talking millennia.
It's huge, and it's also the most scary thing for people to think about. And so probably we hide our heads in the sand about it a little bit. And I when I talk about interlinked problems, if we're fearful of immigration, and now
you don't want to make half of where everyone lives uninhabitable.
It's going to get worse, like with climate change, it will get worse, and that will create additional problems. So I think when we talk about how we create connection, we have to accept that the challenges we are facing now will be exacerbated by climate change. On top of that, we know that climate change will affect the poorest in society, and again, that's globally, nationally, and locally. more than anyone else. And so that will have an impact on inequality as well, because, those without will suffer more. And so, climate change.
And we'll respond to that. People don't just lay down and die. There's this sort of thinking of, oh, well, homeless people largely don't cause a problem. They're just wait there to die. It's like, yeah, but if there's millions of them, they start talking, they have ideas. They go, hang on, there's a million of us. We've got these sticks. Let's go and do it.
We can organise it.
Yeah.
And it's, in lots of ways, I'd love to see that happening. I think we're not quick enough to organise anymore. And actually, whether you agree with a protest or not, whether you see a rally, whether you agree with what they're rallying about or not, it doesn't matter. The fact that people have come together to fight their corner and sort of try to be heard is really valuable. And so actually we need a bit more of that.
Yeah.
But climate change is here. It's happening now, and we need to consider it in everything we do. It's not all right to just make sure you compost that banana skin or that. It's actually what we need to think about is local economies, our supply chain, consuming less. I'm really big on consuming less. You might be able to tell that from the clothes I wear. It's like, learn from our past. We don't need stuff. We need experiences, and most of those can cost absolutely nothing. So I think we need to challenge the way we consume things. We need to challenge the way we live, and work is part of that as well.
Yeah, and there needs to be. So one of the things that we've done on again, it's come up a fair bit of, changing your light bulbs and changing your shopping bags is not enough. And we need legislation. We need, infrastructure builds and stuff, and that's going on. Like Britain was a world leader in renewable energy and this, that, and the other. And they're trying to make it all out like, oh, the pendulum's swinging the other way, and that's all well and good until, a significant disaster happens that makes it swing back the other way. But we need that pressure, and we need something in between where it's not just, you have to go and join the Green Party and vote Green or whatever. There needs to be something that we can do en masse. And I'm thinking of things like, have you heard of Operation Noah? So it's like the churches, there are various denominations of Christian churches, and there might be other religions as well that are kind of trying to do climate work, and sort of we're working together on this. We need that civil society space, but we need it which is going to be really hard to do now, but it needs to be more bipartisan. Do you know what I mean? So if you think of something like the union movement post-war, it was kind of, no matter what side of the aisle you were on, you were kind of pro-union, or at least you had to listen to them because there was a consensus around that, and that's where we need to get to with this, I think. And I think we will, and obviously there'll be all arguments in between, but I think we're missing that. It's like there's a big social actor missing from society, isn't it? It's like whether it's unions or the church or, science even as a secular space of like, well, we're doing all the work in this area. And I suppose because you've got these, I'm going off on one now, sorry. You've got all these fragmented kind of communities that there's no big project, but then was there ever really a big project? Is that just a story that we're inheriting, all of that kind of stuff? But it feels like something's missing to me.
I think, and I haven't quite come to a conclusion on consumption and growth. I heard an interesting story that the chief exec, whatever their title is, of IKEA was asked, what does failure look like? And they said, not growing year on year. And you're like, okay, but that means you've got to sell more stuff, which means you've got to produce more stuff, which means there's more waste, which means, we're using resource. And, so I think that there has to be an emphasis on how we degrow and how we shrink, or we consume less. So I think, I can't remember, it's about looking for a player. But within that, within the growth, the consumption sort of agenda, people are treated as individuals. And I think we need to sort of stop and ask ourselves, am I happy being an individual in a connected world, or do I want to work collectively, with each other to solve these insurmountable problems? So I've taken great solace, and this is probably personally rather than through my work, of just trying to make little changes. And I don't show off about them, but I do try and let other people know what I'm doing, to say, don't worry if you don't do it, but let's, if we all do these little things, it's so I think probably the driver is collectivism again, and challenging being extremely individual. And I think a lot of the problems are because we live in a society where everyone's angry a lot of the time, but that's because, there's just the sort of outrage of, well, I want that. And actually we need to stop wanting so much and working out, we talked earlier about asking the question, how is it you want to live? What does the end look like? And then you can work out how you get there. I heard this wonderful story, I hope it's true, about Norway after the war, where the Norwegians were asked, what kind of society do you want to live in? And they came up with all these wonderful ideas. And then the government said, okay, well, it will cost this much. And they said, okay, let's go for it. And, as I say, I don't know if it's true. I've asked my friend who's told me twice, he says he believes it is, which is why they have such high taxes there, because, it's like, you wanted this. And you've got a really great quality of life. Yeah. But it costs this much. And I think we need to be having those adult chats about what it is we want, and then a real honesty. And again, yesterday, with whether you like the current administration or not, I like the fact that they were saying, if we want this stuff, we all have to pay something towards it. And so collectivism, I think, is what we need for tackling the biggest single challenge we face, which is climate change.
Yeah, and I think most of the disagreements on that would be these sort of, because it's put into this oppositional kind of matrix, isn't it, of like, what is nationalism if it's not collectivism? Oh, but it's not collectivism because collectivism's lefty and it's this, that and the other. And it's like, and the post-Brexit stuff, flags were always going to play a part in it, but you didn't, where's the Buy in British campaign? Where's the, where's the help to start factories and start businesses here? Where's the help to support the factories and businesses that are already here? Where's the apprenticeship? And they're there, they exist. It's like, roll them out, invest in something, commit to something, but it's all this, oh, well, someone's going to come in and change it all and rip it out. Again, the short-termist thing of just do something, commit to something. Even if it doesn't work out, at least you tried.
Right. Yeah. And don't be fearful of that failure, just be proud of what you tried, back to Icarus.
And you can learn from that. Yeah. So do you want to, is there anything more to say on climate change at the moment? I mean, obviously there's hours and hours of things to say on it, but so we'll do social media. I think this will be quite interesting. So what I want to look at specifically here, so it's kind of like, do you get it? Does it work for you? But I frame it as your investment in time. So the amount of time that you have to put into doing social media. So your role in the organisation, you'll have had to do some, I imagine, but maybe not loads. But how much time do you need to spend on it? And do you think that's a good use of your time? Do you get what you want out of it? Does it bring the results that it's supposed to bring?
Well, there's two ways of looking at this. Me personally, I invest very little time in social media for work, and different platforms do different things for different people. They speak to different audiences. So in terms of how we engage with the communities that we work with alongside, it's really helpful to advertise, but I don't do that myself. we achieve the aims of our funders, and the KPIs by advertising through social media. We also have Foodwise. We host Foodwise, the food partnership, and we have a comms person who works with us on that. And I think the investment in that person pays very healthy dividend. So I think what I'm saying is, in my role, I don't have the time to invest in social media. I see the advantages of it, but I think we need to understand how important comms are for the charitable sector and invest properly at the right level in an organisation to make it work for that organisation, because the benefit of it is huge, but you've really got to understand what you're trying to say and how you're trying to say it, and to the right audience.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I'm going to put it to you.
Okay.
Should you have done more? Do you think it might have helped if you'd have been more out there, more identified with the thing? So I'm getting the feeling now, brands will be a thing, but the personification and this, people dying for authenticity, that it's going to become more personalised. And you see a lot of people, especially on LinkedIn at the moment, where they're, it's the personal brand thing. Would you be comfortable with that? Would that...
Yeah. Me
could
personally,
you,
or speaking as an organisation?
Well, and both, maybe. I mean, do you think you should have done more? Would that have helped if you'd have been more visible as a person and associated with the brand? Or not, I guess. And then I suppose, would you be more online in future, or is that not something...
Personally, I probably won't be on more online in the future, but that's because I sort of see that social media is an echo chamber to make people angry, and so I only want to use it to make myself feel happy. So I'll follow stuff that brings me joy rather than anger.
Yeah.
In terms of how I think you have to answer that question though, sort of the organisation with how long's a piece of string, because. Yeah. Social media has become something that has become monetized, and if you have infinite resource, you can get your brand out there infinitely better than a charity that's struggling and having to justify every penny it spends. So if you invest, it's about having a strategy and understanding what you want to get out of it. And I think we probably missed out on that. And I think that there's lots of organisations who think, well, I've got to do social media, but they need to be challenged to say, well, what is it you're using it to achieve? And realising that you are a very small fish in a very big sea, and there, even within the charitable world, there'll be the Oxfams who will have just the resource to swamp you. Not that they're trying to do that, but it's like that they will get onto other people's feeds far better than Zest would. So I think it's probably you need to invest the time in the strategy to say what it is you want to achieve by investing in that strategy, rather than just doing more of it, because that won't work. And it's not the only thing. I've got this wonderful story that pre-COVID, we were trying to fundraise in ways we hadn't done before. So we were trying to reduce our reliance on grants and contracts. So part of my job was going out and speaking to people, networking, and I was attending events. Sometimes you get up and you think, I can't face this today. Others, it's like, I'm going to learn something new. I'm going to meet someone new. But that was pre-2018. After COVID, I got contacted by someone saying, are you still working for Zest? Because we would like to take you on as the charity of, our charity of choice. So would I have achieved that through social media? No. So, social media is part of a comms strategy that is also paper or advertising. It's also speaking to people. So I think it's not the panacea that people see it as. It's got to be part of a strategy to get your name out there. So would I invest more in it? If I had the time and the money to invest in it, then yes, but I would I would use that time and money, first of all, to buy in expertise to support me with developing the strategy.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good answer. Any more to say on this one?
No.
Okay, good.
I was worried about that because I really don't know a lot about social media.
Well, I mean, is this social media that you're doing now?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's not like you don't do none for work. So, I mean, how would you have felt if you'd spent more of your time rather than, doing what you were doing, the work, dealing with your colleagues and stakeholders and delivering and, to a degree working with funders and so on and, trying to generate your own revenue. If you'd have spent more of that time, being on BBC Radio and Leeds and in the newspapers and, being in videos, is that a personal choice thing? Would that be a better use of your time? Did you not do enough of it? Should you have done more? Or do you think you spent your time wisely in...
Yeah, I've spent my time wisely.
Yeah.
There's always different ways of spending your time and, but I've always said within the charitable sector, we're the jack of all trades and the master of none.
Yeah.
That's probably the just the resource thing,
Yeah.
If we were Coca-Cola and we had the resource that, Coca-Cola has, we would spend the money very differently than they do, but we would be able to do things well-resourced. And I think that's part of the problem, that we're constantly trying to do everything for everyone.
Yeah.
And that we just need more resource.
Yeah.
Doesn't everyone?
I think that's a good point as well, though. I think, I do think you probably get more generalists in the third sector than in other sectors. There's more specialisation in the other two. And you get specialists in the third sector. There's a lot of talent and a lot of really skilled people who are really good at, a few things or, particularly good at a few things, say. But yeah, it's full of generalists, isn't it? It's full of people just going, what can I do to help? I can do this, I can lift that, move that over there and these things. And then you suddenly start to find all their skills, don't you? Of well, you're really good at that. And you're also really good at that. Could you do more of these two things that you're really good at? And then they're like, oh, I didn't know I was really good at that. Yeah. So yeah, and it's a really good, I think it's, well, it depends where you land in the sector and the opportunities that you're given. But I think it's really good at discoverability for your skills and for you finding out what you like and what you're good at and that you don't necessarily get in the other two sectors.
Yeah, you get time to flourish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you also get time doing a lot of kind of boring stuff that you're like, what's the point of this? Is this helping? Yeah. And then someone comes and says, yes, it really is helping. I know that it doesn't feel like it, but yeah. So I'm going to do the UBI question next. I'm going to leave the change question to the end because I think that comes back more to where the, bringing things to an end and next steps and so on. So UBI, obviously it's a massive area. We can cover as much of it as you want or talk about it as much as you want. I'm assuming you're familiar with this concept already, working in the space that you're working in. So if there was a UBI, so obviously there's two parts to consider for you here. Your personal sort of how it might affect your work personally and also how it might affect your actual work in terms of your deliverables and what you need to deliver. So how do you think a UBI might change things for you?
Personally, and I suppose, I don't think it would change a lot for me as such. It wouldn't affect me. And you said earlier, I assume you know a lot about it. I didn't know a huge amount, and I did some reading, in preparation for this. So I suppose personally, I don't think it would affect me. For my work, I think, if done right and if implemented correctly, it would contribute massively to eliminating poverty.
Yeah.
And so that would support the reduction of inequality. So you're right, transformational is the word. It would be transformational. But you know what's coming. But what I know would happen within this is it would be argued it's costly and there would be elements that would be saying that it's going to the wrong people and it's going to the wrong places. Irrespective of those, I think, at a time of limited resource, there would be such great challenge to try and implement it in the right way that it would contribute to fueling greater division, or potentially could contribute to fueling greater division, especially amongst certain political agitators. So I suppose that's the top line. Yes, it would change the work that we do, but we really need to, again, it's about adult conversations about, actually let's see how it works. So we need to spend time really having honest conversation. But the thing that worries me most about UBI is that if we don't change the system that we're living in, the consumption system as well, then actually investing in a basic income for everyone, that wealth will just drain out of communities.
Yeah, they'll get sucked up to the top.
Yeah, it will go to Tesco or, whoever,
But you think of Russia and like all of the share, how do you get oligarchs? Where you give everyone shares in all of the companies and then they sell them because they've got nothing else. So all of that wealth all gets collected into one place. So it gets sucked up, yeah.
So what you need to do within this, or what I would think we need to do, is really understand how that resource is recycled into the community. So basically the Leeds pound stays in Leeds, or the Birmingham pound stays in Birmingham. So I think, actually you have to invest in local infrastructure and support local businesses. And by local businesses, I mean, your corner shop, your little cafe, not Starbucks that, where we can put a Starbucks in there, or Tesco's Extras. Sorry, Starbucks and Tesco's. I'm not picking on them, but it's actually about how we retain the wealth within communities. And so within that, you don't just need to invest in a UBI for the communities we're working in. You need to invest in the infrastructure to make place happy and meaningful, and the connection, so where communities can thrive. Yeah. And I know before we started, we were talking about Patrick Grant and the book he wrote called Less, which predominantly, I suppose, comes from a textile place. But he talks about meaningful employment and employment being community. So if UBI comes into that, it's actually how we feel within our community and how we feel happy and connected within the community. So I think, in itself, it's not going to solve all the problems. The theory, yes, but we need to really understand the ecosystem that it's serving to make sure that that's right. And if we can get that right, then our work would pretty much be done.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things with UBI that I've discussed before is that, and like I was saying to you about rest, we need to break the connection, or the idea that work and money are related. I mean, they clearly aren't. It's like the George Monbiot thing of, if you got paid for the amount of work you did, the women in Africa would be the richest in the world, kind of thing. So we need to break that link. But then you have the other problem that we found from industrialized society of, well, what do you do when you put all these people out of work, or, vagrancy and idleness, and then you get the temperance movement and things like that, because it's like, oh, well, they're morally bad because they're all drinking. It's like, but they've got nothing to do.
It's a useful pastime.
Yeah. Or, and crime and social upheaval and stuff. And also, there, just depending on where you sort of sit on the spectrum, but I think there's truth in it. Of like, a lot of people, I've quite often felt like I've just been paid to be off the street, like not to cause trouble and not organise things and foment revolution. It was just like, go and sit there and be on Facebook, you. Because if people have got time and they're talking and they're going to come up with ideas, and like, that is a legitimate threat. Like, it's a legitimate kind of social concern, as with vagrancy and so on. And it's like, idleness and listfulness and so on. But then you also need times of not doing stuff. Like, it's okay to be a bit of a bum for a while and kick around and not, be all bohemian. Like, and I think that's good for your soul and your character and your development. but also it gets rotten quite quickly as well, doesn't it? Especially if you're isolated. So yeah, it fixes things in some ways, and then it throws up a whole bunch of other social problems. It's like, it's really hard, this fixing society. Yes, it's almost like it doesn't stay still, isn't it? It's almost like it's really dynamic and keeps changing.
Yeah, it's got its own life. Yeah, and it's chaotic. I think that's it. We tend to want to control chaos.
Yeah,
and actually we should embrace chaos because certainly you see my desk. But because chaos is good. There is an order in chaos, and actually the universe is chaotic. So we it's all right to be chaotic, and we shouldn't control. In fact, that's one reason I think I like working in the charitable sector, because actually we are able to embrace chaos a little bit more. It's it's the state that wants to impose order,
Yeah.
And I think some of that is a really good thing, but we also have to accept that not everything can be organised and orderly.
I think that's a really good point. And like I was saying about how the sector is very reactive and it's hard to be proactive there and the long-term thinking and stuff. But it's also, that's kind of what's exciting about it as well. Like, that's a really good point. And it is that sort of, what is it now? Okay, that's hell. Right, what do we do? Yeah. Like, not that just standing there and freezing. It's like, okay, what do we do? What have we got? It's like, you must have seen Apollo 13. And like everyone loves that film because it's amazing because it's a true story. And it's like, we've got these toilet rolls and some sticky back plastic and guys in space. How do we do that? What? How? We can't. Well, we have to. Yeah. So what are we going to do? Yeah. And I love that. And I think we need more of that, of the sort of, well, this is an insurmountable challenge. Yes, good, great. Let's get on with it then.
Let's take a risk.
Let's do it. Let's conquer this.
I mean, if you think about it, the fact that we are sat here, having a conversation is the result of the tiniest chances of things happening all the way throughout our combined lives of 100 years. Like from conception right to now, and so actually. Take a risk because good stuff happens when risks happen.
Yeah.
Or risks are taken.
Yeah, and you don't always know how it's going to go.
Yeah. Enjoy chance.
Yeah. So that's a great segue into change. So the question is generally, what if you could change any 3 things about your work? What would you change? It can be anything at all. It can be realistic or really pragmatic. It can be really boring, like I'd get a new pen and like I need a new screensaver or something, whatever. It's difficult for some people, especially when they have their own business, because they can change a lot of stuff. But I think that kind of limits how they think about it as well. So maybe we bring in some of the stuff about the changes for Zest at the moment. But if not, we can do a bit more on it after the question. But yeah, how would you change things if you could?
I scribbled a few things down, and I'll probably just come out with them and use that as a basis for conversation. But I think 3 things? System change, and that's about investing in prevention. So we're constantly dealing with chronic problems, whereas actually we need to invest in prevention. And I think within that we have to be realistic that the work we do, if we invest in it well, we won't see the benefit of it. We're investing for a future generation, and I think we have to be really honest and open about that. So I think it's saying let's properly invest in prevention now would be the first thing I would want to change. I would also say we need to have an honest conversation about philanthropy, and I use philanthropy in a sort of, it's probably a Victorian way still. But, like the charities seem to have to be, or expected to shapeshift and change based on the whim of a funder. And funders are brilliant. I'm not having a go at any funder. They are all brilliant and they're all set up for a reason. But I think we have to be honest about, how philanthropy happens. And I think that's starting. I think there is conversation about just giving money and trusting organisations to know what they're doing. But I think we just have to sort of change the dial on that and stop. And within that, also be honest about the costs of, how much it costs to run things. Stop telling us we need to cut our core costs when actually that's the thing that we need to invest in to grow. Yeah. And I was going to say invite charities to the top table, in a realistic way, and really spend time understanding them. But I think actually I'm just going to abdicate that one and say that what I would change is I talked about there's too much anger in the world at the moment. Everyone's busy being angry about things. Aristotle's got a wonderful quote on anger and anger management. It's, anyone can be angry. That's easy. It's like being angry with the right person at the right time for the right length of time and for the right reason. That's what we need to do. I'm not saying we should be less or more angry, but I think what we need to do as a society that will benefit the work I do is stop meeting hate with hate and spend more time sitting and listening and understanding each other and trying to understand each other's viewpoints. There's people I genuinely disagree with in this world. I'm trying to hate them. Sorry, that came out wrong. I hope that gets edited. I'm trying to hate them less than I used to. In fact, I'm not trying to hate people at all anymore. I'm trying to understand why they're doing something. And I think if we can all stop and realise that there are people with other points of view, that might be your colleague who's doing something in a different way to you. That might be your colleague who's leaving a mess, at the tea bar, whatever it might be. But actually, we just need to be more tolerant and understanding of one another. And that will help create connection.
I agree with that to a point, because I think that we give too much space to a lot of people who should just be like, shut up, you don't get to speak anymore. Do you know what I mean? And it's like the people that will sit there and spend time trying to, explain things or break things down or treat something seriously when someone's obviously a bad actor, when they're literally trolling you and they've said something just to get that reaction out of you so that you waste your time having that reaction, when really the reaction you should have is ignore that person, focus on something important.
And I
you see what I'm saying with that? Yeah.
And I think that's about, not necessarily understanding that person, but, choosing what you do with that anger. And it's like, okay, if you want to be that person, you won't wind me up anymore. I will just go and use that energy that I have for something different. Yeah. And we had that, or you raised the idea earlier about your media diet, and I suppose that's it's within our gift to understand what media diet we consume to be either more or less angry with other people, and then I suppose what we do with that is our choice. Yeah,
I think that's a really good point. So you're winding things down. We've mentioned it a couple of times. Hopefully the audience has picked up on that. That's clear. Yes. But so I mean, how do you want to talk about? Because I'm inclined to be like, how do you feel about it, and what do you think happens next? Because we talked before. You were upset. You were feeling potentially like a bit of failure. Now you're coming into acceptance, stages of grief, isn't it? And sort of a bit more positive thinking about it. So, what do you want to say about? I don't know. I guess. How it's ended, where it's ended, and like you say, is this just a new beginning? Is this going to be the phoenix rising from the ashes or something else?
Yeah, I mean, where does Zest end? How does it end? We are closing our doors on the 31st of December this year. And we have had an impact on the city. We have had an impact. We've worked with 5,000 people to support, a greater understanding of how to cook healthy, affordable meals from scratch. You know, we've got all of that stuff.
Fed 5,000.
Yeah, there we go. I never thought of it like that. There's our soundbite. But we've had an impact. You know, we've also had a real impact. Our staff, you know, like our people, the organisation has an impact on them, and they have had an impact on us that's been positive, overwhelmingly positive. There have been challenges along the way, you know, but you know, every time we've tried to do our best. And I think, you know, as we close, I don't think it's a failure that we're closing. We've accepted a reality, but we're also accepting that we've tried. And that's the most important thing. And I think, you know, sort of the message is, yes, the city is losing. There's going to be a zest-shaped hole in the city. That will get filled. But actually, I think the message is, you know, choice, connection and celebration are really important. And don't forget to try doing that in and amongst all this stuff. And, you know, don't be afraid of trying either.
That's a very beautiful sentiment, very well expressed. Do you want to add any more, or do you think that's a really good out point?
I think that's probably,
I think that's a really good place to end. I mean, do you want to put any socials in if people want to get in touch, or I mean, I can just put show links in if you want to direct people to a specific thing.
Yeah,
or...
I mean, there won't be a lot of Zest socials going forward, but I'm happy to share those with you. And I suppose if anyone wants to have a conversation with me personally about, you know, the adventures that I've been on, and you know, the challenges that we face, but also the solutions that we can come up with, then LinkedIn is probably the best place, which is just search for Dom Charkin.
Thank you again to Dominic for being my guest. Thanks, as always, to all my guests. And thanks to you, Leeds, for being my subject. Go check out the Old Red Fire Station, oldredfirestationgipton.org.uk. If you would like to be on this show, then you can email me at workinghourspod@westernstudios.com. If you manage to book your interview in and record it before I hit 200 recorded and approved for publication interviews, then your episode will be free. There's around a half dozen free slots left at the moment. After that, we're only going to make episodes that have been paid for. It will cost $77.77 to make an audio-only episode and £99.99 to record a video and audio episode for loiners only. Again, a loiner for the purposes of this podcast is anyone who lives or works in an LS postcode, or anyone who was born in an LS postcode. I also want to offer paid-for episodes so that people who can't afford to buy a Working Hours episode themselves can still have an opportunity to have their own Working Hours episode. Any donations or membership payments that sum up to covering the costs of making a Working Hours episode can then be offered to loiners who might like a Working Hours episode for and about themselves and their work, but cannot pay. To put it another way, listener, if you buy more episodes of Working Hours, you will get more episodes of Working Hours. I'll need to raise more than the retail price for these episodes, as you do lose a big cut of the funds from those payment websites. So for every £150 raised, I can offer an audio recording, and for every £200 raised, I can offer an online recording to somebody. I'm also going to be offering non-loiners the chance to put their money where their mouth is and buy their very own episodes of Working Hours. They will be priced at £199.99 whether you're in the UK or not, and they will be online recordings only. If you're outside the UK, we can drop the Brexit question, unless you want to say anything about it. I'm also going to offer add-on purchases to people so they can buy some social content from their published episodes. So one version of Working Hours is ending, but a new one might be beginning. I'd like to thank everyone who has shared and liked and guested and talked about and listened to Working Hours. We're on 25 subs on YouTube now and looking towards 30. We've done 7,000 total downloads and we'll be on 8 soon. We've had over 4,000 unique listens on the audio episodes alone, and that will be at 5k soon enough. We've had around £1,000 donated to the show. We've had episodes with hundreds of listens. We've lasted 5 years and captured some of that on the show. If you've enjoyed Working Hours at all and liked having it around, for any part of the last 5 years. If you think working hours is a good thing to have in the world, or better yet, a good thing to have in Leeds, if you think any part of working hours is worth a fiver or more, literally the price of a fancy coffee, then please throw in some cash to keep this show going. It's a highly logical and functional deal in line with the traditions of pay more, action work, get thing. The old ways are the best. Okay, that's me. Remember, listener, no matter what you do, it is impossible for you to understand anything, that your salary depends on you not understanding. So try to work for peace and try to plan with kindness. Raise your voice, but reduce your impact. Cheers, ears. Take care out there and be kind to each other, Leeds. Working Hours is produced, recorded, edited, created and published by Simon Treen for Western Studios Leeds Limited. The music was The Bees from Chopin's Etudes, which is in the public domain and was taken from museopen.org. Remember, Western Studios Leeds Limited when you're ready to start making your content in West Yorkshire. Follow Western Studios Leeds on Facebook, facebook.com/Western_Studios_Leeds, and on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/company/Western-Studios. Bookmark western-studios.com so you can see the latest prices and use my contact page to drop me a message about your own podcast project or working hours at any time from anywhere. Maybe you want or need a podcast host, co-host or narrator for your podcast project. Maybe you just need another voice for one or more episodes of your show. Podcasts are so much more than gossip, book promotions and marketing for online courses. Podcasts and other audio content get your online brand out there. Want to make some fundraising case studies? Want to have an audiobook or video course? Want to share your learning, knowledge and expertise in your field? Want to learn, teach or raise awareness of something general or particular? Want to improve internal comms with messages your staff might actually engage with? Or do you just want to brighten up the world with some entertaining content? Then make a podcast. If you're making your podcast within West Yorkshire, then think about making it with western-studios.com. Whatever your podcast questions or needs, get in touch with Western Studios Leeds.